This podcast is sponsored by Your Brand Marketing. Today, podcasts are like what websites were 30 years ago. Sign up for the 30-day podcast challenge. Go to 30daypodcastchallenge.com and use promo code YELLOW to get your discount.
Hi there. My name is Ben Baker, and my company is Your Brand Marketing. I've been podcasting for over 4 years with over 250 episodes, and I've been on over 200 shows. The one thing I can tell you is there's a lot of good podcasts out there, and there's a lot of bad podcasts out there, and there's a lot that will never see the light of day again. And the problem is, most of them never make it past 10 episodes. My goal is to help you create a podcast that speaks to your audience in your voice, shows what makes you valuable to them, and helps them know, like, and trust you. I want to give you the tools that you need to succeed. So join me at 30daypodcastchallenge.com. That's 30daypodcastchallenge.com, and use code YELLOW for your special discount. Thanks for having me, and now on with the show.
And we're back. This is the Yellow Book Road podcast. This is the podcast where we try to provide insight and wisdom and how innovation, and try to steal ideas from other industries, get really smart people on here, go into more detail on things. But the general idea is how can we truly transform the insurance industry? And this podcast is really geared towards the smallish insurer, the ones that may not have deep pockets, competing against behemoths now, competing against insurtechs. The ideas here are to help you compete. And we're going to be talking about claims today. I have Tim Christ from Claimatic with me. Tim, welcome back.
Nick, thanks for having me back.
Yeah.
And other than what you said about having really smart people on here, I'm happy to grace your stage.
You are a really smart person, and you have like a wealth of experience. And so I facetiously say welcome back because we've done this before. It never saw the light of day. I'm hoping that we get to pull on some threads and get some tidbits here where I can go back to our old video file and chop that up a little bit so we can share some information on that. But Tim, you're with Claimatic. We're going to be talking about claims. Why don't you just give us a quick elevator pitch on who you are and who Claimatic is?
Sure. No, I appreciate that. Yes, I'm vice president here at Claimatic. Technically, we're still an insurtech startup, a fairly small company, only been around about 5 years. But we've got a SaaS platform that we built, which is essentially an intelligent decisioning tool that helps carriers ingest their first notices of loss, determine who the best resources are for that particular type of claim, and then automates the entire assignment process of that to get it in the right hands more quickly.
Yeah. So this isn't technically a business interview, although I think you probably will have a lot of details from Claimatic. It's a lot of it's just your career experience, and I want to jump right in and get into a thread that we pulled the last time we talked, and we started going into this when I told you to stop. Let's hit record. Let's save some of this gold for the recording. And it gets to a pet peeve of mine that has existed for a very long time around claims. Claims, they almost have like an impossible job. It's someone has a loss, they call, and especially during like catastrophe times where, the claims folks are juggling hundreds, potentially thousands of different claims trying to manage it. And my pet peeve is with the silo, that they're always there. They're kind of by themselves. They're their own department, kind of doing their own thing. And I think that's a problem. I think that's a problem in insurance because there's so much wisdom that gets developed over time. And if it gets trapped in that silo, it's difficult for it to make its way back to, the other parts, actuarial, underwriting, marketing, all of those things. And so I want to start there. And I brought up the term virtuous cycle. What can we learn from claims that we can bring back to underwriting to make it better? Can you talk a little bit about the silo yourself? Because you've seen it for a big chunk of your career, everything from when you we're doing forensic engineering to you must see it now as well, and talk about the disadvantages of having claims kind of just be their own department, and how they get paid, how they do their work, how they think about things. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, and like you said, it's got a lot of different angles to it, right? I mean, I think to your point, claims is a tough area because you've got not only the direct interaction with the insureds that you're trying to manage and or claimants, but then you've also got all the internal stuff that you're trying to manage. And the thing that most claim adjusters really love to do is actually be out there in the field working with the insureds, rebuilding their house or rebuilding their business, getting them back up and running. But what they don't necessarily love is all the administrative work on the back end to make sure that they've dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's to make sure that they look good to their carrier. So I think, with the focus of this podcast being kind of the small and mid-sized guys, I think one of the things you want to think about from a silo perspective is what we typically see in claims is, there's anywhere between 10 and 20% of the claims that come through are fraudulent. And so I think part of what we think about when we go down that road for a second is if we can better underwrite or figure out what the attributes are for those particular risks and give that back to underwriting, we have a couple of options available to us. We either A, don't write them at all. We B, write them with the premium associated to that elevated risk level, or C, we have some modifications of coverage in there that allow us to balance out that risk reward transfer mechanism, right? So that takes care of, a lot of the costs associated with the claims department in and of itself. And then I think when you also think about, when you look at the totality of claims, as a forensic engineer, I only saw probably the worst 10 or 20% of them because, a lot of insurance claims are plain vanilla. And, it's a matter of, hey, somebody had a loss, they need to get paid. But the only question becomes is, are you paying the correct amount? And so when I've had conversations with chief claims officers before about their roles and about how they try to do better within their own organizations, there's always a lot of the easy focus is always on either corporate overhead. Hey, we'll just cut some staff and make everybody work harder. Or they'll say, well, let's try to cut LAE. We'll, we'll change up our vendor management program. We'll cut some vendor costs, or we'll do some reverse auctions or other things. But there's not always a lot of work spent on looking at the indemnity dollar side. And what I find from a forensic engineering perspective is, it's pennies on the LAE side and it's dollar bills or $10 bills or $100 bills on the indemnity dollar side. The challenge is that to get to the dollars on the indemnity side, it goes to the quality of the investigation, which then drives back to, well, do we have the right people in the right seats on the bus? And do we have the right systems in place to monitor and manage those folks? And
right.
So that's really the big challenge for CCOs.
So if you get cheap, right? If you want to hire the cheapest forensic engineer or the cheapest forensic accountant to do your, BI investigation, then that's dollars too, right? Like that could show up in a bad way in how those claims get adjudicated. So a lot of times you can be penny wise and dollar foolish, right?
100%. I mean, yeah, at the end of the day, you get what you pay for, right? And it's really easy to see in some metrics. I mean, I've talked to some, carriers where let's take an easy example, like with fire claims. So they've modified their vendor panel and they've gone back to some of their fire investigators and they've said, hey, look, this is too expensive for us. Instead of a basic investigation costing us $1,200, can we do it for $850? And then all of a sudden the subrogation referral percentage drops off from 70% to 25%. And so, when I think through, like just, Nick, you and me from an insured perspective, if I wanted to measure the effectiveness and the quality of my insurance company, the one that insures me, I'd love to know what their subrogation recovery deductible percentages. How efficient are they at getting that money back for their insured? Because that's a great measurement to how good they are as a business. Yeah. But nobody measures that, and that's not transparent to anybody.
So dig into that a little bit. Let's because that's really interesting. So it's possible that a lot of the smallish insurance companies may have very minimal subrogation staff, right? So can you talk a little bit about like how they could leverage that piece of it and sort of, return dollars? And I love what you said, the ability to, for an insurer, the ability to measure that sort of thing. How might we be able to do that? Like, what kind of questions would we need to ask?
Well, I mean, it's a metric that they can go find. It's probably not something that they run on a daily, monthly basis, but it's definitely a number that exists somewhere within their their reams of data. But no, I think from a claims perspective, that the challenge is multiple, right? So if you're slow to get out to a loss, and I'll give you a perfect example just from a very easy perspective. So we had moved into our old home in, let's say it was March. We had a water softener installed immediately upon moving in. And within 6 weeks of that water softener being installed, we came home to literally water running out of our garage. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, me being the forensic engineer, the geek guy, right, I want to go figure out what the heck happened. And what I figured out was there was a PVC fitting on that water softener that had been installed by the plumber that split open and failed. And so when it went through its backflush cycle, it spewed 30 or 40 gallons of water into my garage. Our baby's room is the direct wall adjacent to our garage. So of course, all that carpet and everything in the baby's room got wet, and then obviously the water all ran out through the garage. So the subrogation opportunity came from, well, obviously this is an insulation defect. It's likely a product defect, but it could also be an insulation defect because the plumber, if he over tightened that coupling, he could have caused it to be weaker than it was originally rated for and whatnot. So it's either the plumber's problem or a product problem, right? But it's very, very clear that it's one of those things. Now, for most carriers, if the water mitigation folks get out there and they start to sweep up the water, and obviously now this fitting, because it had split into 4 or 5 pieces, it was in different parts of my garage, they would suck out all those pieces and would have gotten rid of it, and nobody would have ever known, other than the fact that, hey, this is missing, but we can't find it, right? But I knew what I was looking for. And so as I found these pieces in my garage, I put them aside in a little baggie until we were able to put this whole story together.
Like piecing together an airplane after it crashes, kind of thing.
Yeah, well, I'm a hardcore and longtime Hardy Boys and Sherlock Holmes and CSI guy, right? So that's what I just do naturally in my spare time.
I love it.
But the nice thing was we were able to reassemble that fitting, and I didn't have to. I could have taken it to a microscope and had some real detailed analysis to see whether it was an over tightening issue or product issue, or could I send it for chemical analysis to determine what the makeup of the PVC was. But ultimately, when I wrote the report with the pictures and I knew it was the plumber, so I called the plumber and I said, hey, you need to notify your insurance carrier that we had an issue. And I sent them about an 8-page report that said, here was the sequence of events, here's the information I've got, here's the documentation. And they said, oh, it's obviously they said, well, it's obviously our fault, whether it's the product or not is a secondary issue to you. Our responsibility from the contractual relationship perspective is to make you whole. So the plumber immediately stepped in, actually the plumber's insurance company, their CGL coverage, immediately stepped in to cover all the water mitigation costs. So I was not out any personal money to get those guys out to do the dry out. I had already determined, hey, because the carpet was wet, because the sheetrock got damaged, we had to cut out 4 feet of drywall on both sides. We had to pull out the carpet, replace all that. And so we had everything, and so I had the water mitigation guys and whatnot to already reconstruct the house and build it back. And so we knew exactly what those costs were going to be. And I wasn't out, obviously, any money at all. Because they chose to step up and cover it, I never even had to file a claim with my homeowner's insurance policy. But for most folks, that would have been their first call. And so then their homeowner's insurance company would have said, oh, well, if it's a installation issue with this product that just got installed 6 weeks ago, we've got to get a hold of XYZ, all these other people, right? And so part of the issue that comes into play is just the time to get all that done. And again, if we had not collected all those pieces of evidence immediately, then we'd have been left with, okay, well, we know you still could have probably, determined liability, because obviously if it's only been installed for 6 weeks and it fails, you've got at least a 1-year warranty on it. If not multiple years, based on some of the, depending on what state you're in, depending on the statute of repose you have. But since they already accepted it, it was very easy for us to determine. But again, from an insured perspective, if Texas Farm Bureau had covered that for me, I would have still been out the first, call it $4,000. Well, if Texas Farm Bureau says, "Hey, Tim, we've successfully got your house fixed, and by the way, the CGL carrier for the plumber stepped up and wrote us a check, and now here we're writing you a check for your $4,000 back." Well, then that's a wonderful insured experience. But I don't think that we have that very often today, because again, we know subrogation doesn't happen nearly to the extent that it could or should anyway. And so there's just not enough of those really good stories to be out there that help paint an insurance company in a different light to say, "Hey, no, we really do take care of you at the end of the day." But I think that's where a golden opportunity definitely does exist.
Yeah. How much of that do you think is just like the company or the department's just like, wow, that's a lot of work. Like we're already full up with, having to deal with just all of the claims, look at Texas now, right? With all of that stuff going on. If something like that happened, it's like, we don't have time to be able to do all this. But the flip side is that it can, you can get the marvelous experience. You can get funds that get returned back to you to reduce your loss ratios and stuff like that. How much do you think it's just like, oh my God, that's just a lot of work?
Yeah, no, I don't. Well, so I would say to initiate this kind of thing, obviously there's going to be some increase in effort, right? But I think from my perspective and managing now thousands of engineers that we're doing this on a daily basis, once you get trained on it and you understand it, it just simply becomes part of like kind of what's in the back of your head that you don't even necessarily think about. So I believe that if we trained adjusters properly, that they could have that in the back of their mind, and whenever it comes up as an issue, it could be immediately brought to bear, and they say, "Oh, well, in order to do that, I just need to do X, Y, Z," right? And it really wouldn't be that much extra work. It would simply be, hey, because every single claim's got its own nuance anyway. And so if they identify that piece of it, they're like, "Oh, well, hey, I just need to do these extra couple of steps." And again, obviously with technology these days, I think we can also facilitate that workflow to, as they're triaging on their iPad or computer or whatever, we've identified, these are the basic facts of this particular loss, and either yes, no, very quick answers to certain questions. And if it's yes, well, then it tree flows into these other series of questions that you then answer as well, right? But so I think there's a lot of technology that can assist those folks with making those determinations. And even, like on the water mitigation side, if we can get to the point where we're connected to the water mitigation guys that are arriving at the house and say, "Hey, where did the loss originate? What happened? Was it a failure due to X, Y, Z?" And if they check yes, then ask a series of additional questions. Well, okay, so you're saying that, the water softener had some sort of leak. So was it the water softener unit itself, or was it the associated piping connecting the water softener? And, again, they're construction guys, so they'll be able to get more technical in the determination. But I think if we think through that logic and some of those questions that we can ask, we could build in workflows that would ultimately help us gather that information and help everybody get better. And I think too, insureds, at least from my perspective, and maybe I'm unique because we're obviously insurance geeks, but I think insureds love the benefit of people providing them expertise. So whenever I deal with any other trusted advisor, if I hear in their voice and in their confidence and in the questions that they ask me, if I hear a very high level of expertise, I have a lot more confidence and faith in them to do a good job than if they're saying, "Well, I don't know the answer to that," or "No, that really didn't make sense," or anything like that, right? So the better that we can train these people and then also provide them the technological tools to sound really smart and to do the right thing, I think takes it a whole nother level as from an insured experience perspective. And frankly, I mean, you look at it now, I mean, I've been a Texas Farm Bureau customer for 26 years. So when you think about it from a, policy churn perspective or whatever else, I mean, I don't know what my lifetime value is as a client, but I mean, it's obviously pretty high.
Yeah, but I think what you just said kind of highlights what I think we've come full circle, and highlights how the lack of proper incentives, right? So a claims department, when they get, put under the gun, "Hey, we need how are you improving this year? How are you contributing to the, cost cutting, expense cutting exercise of this company?" they're going to do things like that where they could be outsourcing more, cutting budget, and spoiling those particular opportunities. Like those things aren't just going to happen in a vacuum. Those have to be nurtured and trained. Like you have to have a particular culture to say, this is how we do things, like, and know that there's a positive feedback. And it's a concern of mine, having seen it. I know one particular mutual has like 2 claims people in their department, and they've essentially outsourced the whole thing. And so as you're describing the whole subrogation, I'm thinking, there's probably not a lot of training happening. Like they feel as though, hey, we've outsourced this to a company that does what we feel like is a fairly good job. And you lose that opportunity. You lose that opportunity to create that positive element that now you do that right. You got a customer for life in a way, right?
Yeah. Well, I think you just, to your point, I think you have to redefine what quality is, right? And I think, especially and I'm definitely not a small or medium-sized mutual expert, but I guess the questions that come to my head is essentially there's 2 ways you can look at their business. One is, do we shrink our way to profitability, or do we grow our way to profitability?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
some carriers say, hey, our agents are out there writing a bunch of business, may or may not be the best business, but once we actually get it to the underwriting stage, we can determine what we're going to choose to take on and not, right? So the agents sort of provide 1,000 options for us, and we actually only need to accept 600 of those or 200 of those or whatever the number is, and that's a way that we can build our business. Or you've got to develop, like you said, those better relationships and those referral stories to where they say, hey, the small guys like, Texas Farm Bureau or Germania or whoever they happen to be, they've taken such great care of me forever that then my neighbor becomes a new client of theirs, or, it just kind of spreads and continues down the street. I think it's a fundamental business model question, but I think too, the question becomes it should get us back to our roots from an insurance perspective, right? We're professional services. So the better we are at professional services, the better our product becomes.
Exactly. And we're at a very unique point in time because we have so many technical tools now that can help. Like this isn't
experts now.
This isn't a situation where it's like, oh my God, we had 1,000 claims this year. We don't have the staff. We don't have the resources to be able to reach out. If claims can circle, so the claims experience to me is directly links claim and marketing, right? The ability for marketing to look at how net promoter score and all of that, like how are we actually doing now? Those 2 departments are intrinsically linked in the example that you just gave. And then the first example you gave with fraud, getting all of the claims information that you learn from a particular fraudulent case or situations that are fraudulent and bringing that back to underwriting. Now those 2 departments are linked. There's a positive feedback loop of claims bringing something else. And now we have the technology to be able to do that sort of thing. We have the technology to be able to consistently reach out, not just during the claim, like you said, doing it correctly, but also after the claim and following up and things like that. Like we have so many technological tools, and society's at a point now where they probably prefer that. They probably prefer that to someone called me on the phone. They sent an email or something else. Like I feel like there's a convergence, and now that we have the technology to be able to take all of the learnings from claims and start to sprinkle those into other departments without necessarily having to massively add to overhead or resources.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. The technology exists today to at least bring some information and some data and some wisdom together. I think to your earlier question, I think we are at an interesting inflection point in sort of the broader industry. So what we've historically seen, and you can see it on the NPS scores, of JD Power. So the two companies that are growing the fastest are below average in their net promoter score. So what that tells me from a business guy's perspective is that massive advertising spend overcomes bad customer service. So the question
that's one way to look at it. Okay. Yeah.
So the question becomes with technology the way it is and the fact that now we have Yelp reviews for everything, are we at the inflection point where there's a law of diminishing returns for that avenue, where now we actually do need to get better? Because we know from a claims perspective, it's about a 50-50 chance. If I have a claim and I'm with the carrier, it's a 50-50 chance of whether I continue as a client of that carrier or whether I choose another carrier. And most of that is related to claim experience. And so if Nick calls me up, within the first day, and Nick walks me through the whole process, and Nick is really responsive, and I really like Nick, and all these wonderful things happen, I'd probably stay a customer. But if Nick calls me on, 3 days later, and then John calls me 7 days later and says, "Oh, I'm taking over your file because Nick, had too much work to do, and now I'm going to do this," and then John's slow to get back with me, and blah blah blah, and then all of a sudden I finally get a check, 87 days later, then I'm probably not too happy, right? But it's really funny too, from our perspective, even at Claimatic, that it's really that first few hours, I would say within the first 96 hours of the FNOL event is your opportunity as a carrier to shine or not. Because if you reassign it a couple, 3 times, if you're slow to get in touch with somebody, and I mean, we saw from Veris the national numbers, on average, it's still a 2 to 3, 4 day, conversion time from FNOL to first contact. So even in today's, connected world, we can't get a hold of somebody for 4 days. I mean, that's a lifetime you've had a claim, right? I mean,
they're just sitting there, wallowing in their own worry and anxiety.
Yeah, well, part of it's the technology, right? There's a lot of other things that had to happen in order for that to go on. But I mean, again, from my perspective, with our garage, had I, and the water had probably been running for all of 6 or 8 hours by the time we got home that night. But I mean, if I'd have had to wait 4 days just to talk to an adjuster, and then it would have taken another day or 2 to get a water mitigation company out there. I mean, I had the water mitigation guys on their way to my house within an hour of the loss. But it's only because I already know what I'm supposed to do, right?
Yeah.
And
average homeowner wouldn't have a chance. They'd be
no
paralyzed.
idea. That's right. But they're also, and to bring the other part full circle that you talk about, imagine and some of it exists today. Imagine with some of the IoT devices and whatnot that exist, if some of those things are connected to our homes. Well, if I have an automatic water shut off to my house, that if it detects some sort of leak, but there's no other activity in the home, or even if it uses the ring of the video cameras to say nobody's home but the shower's on, and it cuts off the water supply, well, we just mitigated that loss by thousands and thousands of dollars, right? And so when you think about from an underwriting perspective, the people, if I'm an insurance company, the kind of people I want to write are those that are willing to write me a check, be very, very loyal, but frankly, really never need my service, right? Because that's really how I mean, I'm okay if they do need my service, because obviously that's why I've underwritten for it. But I really am in the business of, accepting money, providing them a promise, but hoping that I can provide them some prevention and some tools and not actually have to make good on that promise.
Completely.
So if I underwrite 1,000 houses that all have a water shutoff device versus 1,000 that don't, there's a great example. I think a picture from LinkedIn the other day. There was a tree in the front yard of a house. It was literally staying upright with a bunch of ropes that had been tied from the insured to different anchor points in the lawn. So if an agent drives by that house and says, "Hey, that's the house that I wrote," like, am I really going to write that risk when I see that tree is about to fall on the house? I mean, there's just some really stupid stuff out there. It's like, give me a break.
Yeah. So it, smaller insurers. So I'm thinking of like a lot of the mutuals. There are some big ones as well, but they don't have the resources to be able to outgrow the claims. So the whole, hey, we'll just advertise some more and just get some new customers. That's not an opportunity. That's not a thing that they can do. They don't have the wherewithal to be able to execute on that. And so I think it does get into the experience element of it. And I don't think you have to go too far with that. Now, I know companies like Hippo have been experimenting with IoT. Church Mutual has a really good program on the commercial side for churches because they're predominantly empty, where they do those things, the automatic water shut off and stuff like that. It just seems like a natural for, any of the mutuals or farm bureaus that are listening to this to get in front of that sort of technology, because it's the game that they can probably play the best. It's the one thing that I think is going to give them the opportunity to continuously compete against the big people, is that their mission is supposed to be, looking out for their policyholders. And so it, like, everything you're saying just rings true, but you sort of get stuck in like business 101, where it's like, oh, we have to go through a cost cutting exercise, and you kind of go down like a death spiral of, okay, we're going to trim a little bit here, and that has consequences, instead of what's our mission and what's it going to take for us to sort of execute on that.
Yeah, I mean, from the small mutual guys perspective, the nice thing is with a lot of this technology, the more common approach is a price per claim or a price per file cost. So it's really scalable, right? So whether you've got 3,000 files a year or 35,000 files a year, your cost is buffered. So what I've found with technology is there's always 3 or 4 levels of technology that exists for just about anything. You've got sort of the basic level of functionality that's at a price point. And then you've got more robust functionality for another price point. You've got more robust functionality for another price point. So as you gain complexity and functionality, obviously the cost goes up. But for smaller mutuals, they may only need level 1 or level 2 of that. So if they're trying to talk to a big, one of the big behemoths of the industry and negotiate pricing, which never works out well, understand that there are alternatives to that. But again, the scale is going to be on the smaller side. So there's some good technology out there that will help absolutely in exactly what you're talking about, some of those different incentive areas. And that's a really great story that they can tell, especially on a local level. And this goes back to the training piece, right? So when we think about our distribution arm of all of our either captive or independent agents that are telling our story to the community every day, we've got to somehow disseminate that message. So if the message is, we want those homeowners that actually take really, really good care of their houses, those are the kind of people that we want to write. So if you see a tree, tied up in the yard, that's not somebody that's going to be a whoever client. But if you start having some of that messaging, some of that advertising that talks about those IoT devices, or here's how we mitigated this loss, or here's how we got these people back in their house quicker, that kind of thing, that I think those are some of the stories that likely will register. But to your point, I mean, but it pays crazy big dividends on the claim side. I mean, if you imagine, the average water loss, let's just say 10 grand, but if you've got an IoT device that costs $600 to install in your house, well, how many IoT devices do you have to install before you just save $100,000 in indemnity? I mean, it doesn't take very long. And so, I think there's an opportunity for discussion with, remodelers, contractors in the area, the roofing thing is a big deal these days. What's the age of your roof, condition your roof, that kind of thing. There's a lot of technological tools that help place that more precisely, which ultimately helps insurers if they want to take really good care of their houses. And frankly, if they want to buy a house and then file a claim on it, it's probably not insured you want to have anyway.
Yeah. Sort of adding to the technology thread that we're kind of pulling on here. If we had to build a carrier from scratch today, like, given the amount of technology that exists, right? Today, I could literally see where we could have, hey, our claims department is staffed by 2 people. That's all we need, because we have technology that's allowing for, FNOLs to be handled smoothly. And we have the appropriate outsourcing where they're getting contact, and we have the scheduling software that's allowing the adjusters to get there on the right time. We have virtual inspections that can be done, right? And so, I'm seeing a lot of the smallish carriers, right? And that's not pejorative. I don't want to be insulting to them, but when you have $100 million balance sheet, there's only so much you can do. And for years, decades, they've had to outsource a lot of this stuff. And I think there's that opportunity now where with just a welcoming embrace to technology, they can continue that while at the same time reducing costs. So they can reduce the overall burden of it by just shifting and leveraging the technology to kind of do a lot of the heavy lifting while still getting that positive net promoter score, while still being able to get insights from claims that you can deliver back to marketing, you can deliver back to underwriting. If we were going to do this today, right? Is that how you would do it? Let me kind of clean that up a little bit. If I said, Tim, hey, let's me and you start a carrier. I want you to handle the claims department. How would you do that on a small budget?
Yeah, no, I mean, we talk about that in some of our workshops, and when you actually whiteboard out the insured journey, there's a couple of them, right? There's journey number one is how do they actually go from I need a policy to purchasing a policy, and then if I have a claim, do I continue with that carrier or not? But then the secondary journey is when I actually have a claim, right? So there's it's the same technology stack, but it's two completely separate journeys that you've got to design for how you acquire and build out your company. And so, yeah, I mean, I think absolutely there's software that exists today that you could say, this is going to be my core platform, and then I'm going to plug in all these additional things to it that help facilitate those pieces of it. And, my dad is 69 years old, but I mean, he can get on his phone and do anything, right? So there's certain things like, if they get on their phone and they, through their local app, especially if it's, providing them good information and timely resources and things that are helpful to them before a claim ever happens, they've got a higher likelihood they'll actually download that app. And these days, obviously, with like usage-based insurance, they might already have it to be doing the telematics thing in the background anyway. And so if you say, oh my gosh, I've got to file a claim, you get on your phone and you say, hey, I've had a water loss or blah, 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 whatever. And then the question comes up is, well, hey, Tim, if you're comfortable, you can use our self-service option. Nobody actually has to come out to your house, but we can process your claim instantaneously if you're willing to do the self-service option.
Yeah.
Well, then I've got a choice as an insured. Do I want that or not? If I don't want it, that's great. I'll have somebody come out to the house, but I know then it'll take a day or two. But if I say, yes, I'm okay with taking my phone and doing a video scan of my kitchen, for example, or the garage or whatever else, wherever the issue happened. And if that allows for a faster claim resolution process, then you've saved just a ton of overhead costs because we've incorporated the tech, again, likely on a price per claim basis, to simply process all that for me. But when you think about it, it's so funny when you actually do that customer journey mapping exercise, and then you lay on top of that all the manual touch points that carriers have developed in order to make that happen. It becomes this huge tree diagram that just grows like crazy. And you just see all the manual parts of that process. But when you completely reimagine it from scratch, you absolutely can make it a lot faster. I use the analogy all the time that when my wife and I got married, I built a little 1,000 square foot house. And then over the course of our marriage, when we had kids, we added on kids' bedrooms and we remodeled our kitchen. We added on an outdoor play area. And so over the course of 15 or 20 years, we sort of cobbled together this house. But then, she comes to me, 15 years later and says, hey, honey, I want you to design me a 3,000 square foot house from scratch. Well, the design of my 3,000 square foot house would always look fundamentally different than my 1,000 square foot cobbled together thing. And so we'd say, oh, we put all the kids' bedrooms over here. We would reroute the plumbing, you always do 100 different things, right? So the same concept applies to businesses. So when you say, let's just design from scratch our own insurance company, how we'd like it to look, the picture of the design is always fundamentally different than the real. And so then the question becomes, okay, well, how do we get from the real to the ideal situation, right? And not that we're going to make that journey at once, and not that it's going to happen in 3 years. I mean, it's probably going to be a 5 or 10 or 15-year journey, but we can move in that direction. And the nice thing is that as we move in that direction, fundamentally, we become more profitable because we eliminate some of those inefficiencies that have crept into our old house along the way. We become more streamlined, which again, from an insurance carrier perspective, we are now making the insured experience better. So every step along that journey, we get better and better. The challenge for most smaller insureds is just spending the time to actually think through that entire exercise and actually do all the planning associated with it. Because you've got to do 3 or 4 steps before you even get to the execution phase. And so there's a lot of time, energy investment that, is essentially going to be what you call a sunk cost of just putting that plan together. But that actually, if you go through all that groundwork, it actually lays out, and if you involve the people in the discussion, it lays out all the framework for what you need to do downstream. And then since you've already involved the right people in those early discussions, you've now got buy-in to that transition. And so it absolutely can be a mechanism to help affect some really positive change within your company. But it's going to take some focus, energy, and effort to get there.
Yeah. And I would probably add to that you can't have those discussions in a vacuum, right? So if you're going to have those discussions, it can't just be claims only, right? Because you have to then say, well, how does this affect underwriting? How does this affect product management? How does this affect marketing? So on and so forth. A lot of it just boils down to culture thing, right? Like, who are we, right? Why do we even exist? And that's challenging. And I think a lot of companies are, they don't want to have to necessarily spend the time to have to go through that, because that's not, you can't just go to an offsite for 2 days and kind of solve all of that.
That's right. No, I mean, that by itself, depending on the size of the organization, that's a 6 to 18 month planning effort. But, again, the gains are always realized at the end. It's just like working out, just like losing weight, just like just about anything else in life that's really, really worthwhile. The gains are realized at the end.
So let's sort of end this with how should mutuals and farm bureaus and regional carriers, how should they be leveraging vendors, right? So let's just say that, like, they're committed. They're just like, hey, we know this is going to be an 18-month thing. How should they be vetting and leveraging vendors to help them in that planning, in that kind of peering out into the future, bubbling up to the surface, things that they may, uncovering things, oh, we didn't know those skeletons were there, on those stuff. How would you recommend is the best way for carriers to kind of interact with their vendors to have fruitful planning sessions, where it can be win-win for both sides?
No, that's a really great question. And I guess, I even find it because obviously, even from our perspective, we've got a number of vendors that we use and pay for their services. The fundamental difference that I believe, or that I see, is 20 to 30% of vendors are wanting to be in a true partnership with you, and they're willing to spend some time, energy, and effort on education, discovery, mutual collaboration. And then the other 60 or 70% just want to sell you. And so what I would say, my recommendation is figure out who those vendors are that are willing to spend that time, energy, and effort. And, you're going to have to buy some stuff from some of those other guys, but you can simply kind of put them in that little box and deal with, the contracting mechanism as needed. But there's absolutely a band of folks that want to help walk you through a journey, would love to be a strategic partner, because again, if they help you through a journey, and then, all the small and regional mutuals all talk to each other. PMIC and NAMIC exist, and all these guys, get together a few times a year to have close discussions. And if they know that, this group of 5 or 6 vendors serve company A really, really, really well, then that's going to translate to company B and C and D and E and F. And so, you'll receive the referral mechanism 6 or 7 times over if you do this the right way, versus if you just try to go in there and make a sale. And so my focus and intent has always been, how do I create value for the person across the table first? And even if it's not something that I provide. So frankly, I spend a lot of time in my day where people are asking me questions, and I'm educating them on some other solutions and saying, well, you should go talk to these other people, because I'm definitely not going to pretend to be an expert, but I know they exist because it's important for what they need at that particular moment, even if it doesn't necessarily directly apply to me. So you go find those folks that are willing to have those kind of conversations and play that game, and then figure out what they then don't know collectively as a group, and then figure out where else you need to go.
Yeah. So my recommendation to anyone that's listening to this, reach back out to us. Tim and I will sit down with you, and we'll draft a carrier from scratch and let you know this is how it should be done. This is where you're going. Tim, I'll handle the underwriting side. You can handle the claim side. How's that?
There you go.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, no, yeah, like I said, we absolutely love to have conversations, and strategic discussions are the most fun things we do.
Yeah. No, I dig that too. I just, there's just so many different ways to go, and it gets so intrigued and just obsessed a little bit with just trying to get back to that mission and removing the paralyzing effect of, oh my God, there's all of this technology. How do we decide, And I like the way you kind of simplified it back down to, well, before you even worry about technology, you have a whole bunch of other decisions to make, and they're hard, but they're not impossible. It's just more about just trying to figure out, who do you want to be when you grow up? Who do you want to be? What kind of company do you want to be? What do you want to be known for? You have to answer those things first, and then you can kind of move on to the other stuff, So
yeah, I mean,
like
what I always found is if you do the strategic planning correctly, then the ancillary decisions are easy because they're already essentially dictated by what you've already determined.
Yeah. It either fits or it doesn't.
That's
right?
100%.
It fits our mission. It fits what we're trying to accomplish, or it doesn't fit. And so it becomes a little bit easier. It removes a lot of the paralysis, my opinion. So, Tim, thanks for everyone that's listening. I'll have Tim's connection links and info on the show notes for this. And, please reach out to Tim, reach out to me. And our goal here is to continue the conversation, have insights, network, connect people. And you're not going to find too many people like Tim who have that wealth of forensic engineering background, claims, and others, and can now linking it with the technology. So, Tim, I appreciate the time you coming on.
You're quite welcome, Nicholas. And again, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. And until next time, everyone, please be safe, and we'll see you. Reach out to us, press like, do all those things you're supposed to do to podcasts. So, and we'll see you next time.